So this is where we start to really get into the decision making. Does the frame need more survivability? For me, this is also where we start to see where Jin and Worm and Durja have more opportunity to be a Sentinel as opposed to just Carrier. Of course, they have an opportunity to be a Sentinel. They have an opportunity to be used more in later stages of the game where you might write them off because of their precept, but the thing is, you don't have to equip the precept. Much like Worm, I don't equip his precept. I rely on him strictly for his ability to keep Nova in the background alive through Meta Ray, Guardian, and eventually, once it comes to consoles, Shield Charger. This way, I can sacrifice health or shield mods on her to simply go with quick thinking and add more potential damage or more duration for her molecular prime. And again, there are also the decisions of what you think survivability means to a Sentinel. The only way, I think, I read on this recently, I should have refreshed my memory before recording this. The only way to return a Sentinel's health without just regen, the mod that allows a Sentinel to regen after they have been killed, is rejuvenation, but rejuvenation doesn't go with every single Warframe. It goes with a few of them, but Nova, as I mentioned, Vaban, these two are not ones that really benefit much from health regeneration. Instead, they benefit more from energy siphon or corrosive projection, what have you. And basically, this is where there is a bit of a fork in the road where some will say, and I side with this argument, that Worm is more survivable because his shield is more easily restored, and it's a very large shield. Even in area of effect damage in the raid, typically I don't see his shield taken off, even from a direct bombard hit to, say if I'm Nova in the raid, even a direct hit from a bombard shell to Nova does not take all of Worm's shield. And a shield is the only thing that can be restored to a Sentinel without health rejuvenation, or without dying. And so, personally, I made the decision for myself that shields, or at least a very large shield like Worm's, allows him more survivability. Now, of course, there is the other side to this argument of Carrier having a lot of health and a lot of armor. And I think both of these are reasonable. We have to reason for ourselves what we want our survivability to be within our companion. And for me, I chose Worm, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to use Carrier. In fact, I'm more looking forward to using Carrier than ever, in fact, and this is important. I like his new precept, and I think having choice, again, it's so important that the variety in Warframe and the choice is very important to our gameplay. It's lively and unique, where instead of just, well, there's only one companion or there's only one weapon like in other games, it's no, you have choice and opportunity, and things are starting to mesh together again, where you can combine different things, different Kavats with different frames, different Sentinels with different weapons, different Kubrows on different missions, and that is awesome. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of our decision making on how we choose a companion. Personally, I think that choosing a companion, whichever one you want to take into a mission at a given time, comes down to 3 questions. What is your survivability? Are you a frame that has more survivability? Or are you a frame that has less survivability, that potentially relies on a large energy pool or control mechanics to stay alive? I think that this is where we start to see, again, more of a divide between what Kubrows and Kavats do and what Sentinels do. Sentinels seem to keep frames alive. That just seems to be the way the mods are leaning for them as of late. And Kubrows and Kavats seem to be leaning towards more utility-based things, objectives. And So then the second question comes down to, what is your objective for the mission? Do you want to play with this particular frame? Do you want to play with this particular weapon? Would this weapon benefit from having the Adarza Kavat? Does it only have a 5% crit chance, or like the new core, a 1% crit chance, but a 4 times crit multiplier? If your goal is to see some fucking huge numbers, then I recommend taking the new core with the Adarza Kavat and then finding a survivable frame, possibly Mesa. Messa's Shatter Shield and ability to disable the weapons of enemies around her is phenomenal, making her a very survivable frame. But we will get to individual choices in just a moment. So let's go ahead and pull up our last question, and then we'll also look at a different choice scenario. So the last question I've been talking about through this entire video is consistency. What do you or I find consistent? What is our choice in consistency? I like the consistency of Worm helping me to survive. If your objective or the only consistent thing you want is to have something that picks stuff up for you because you don't want to walk 2 feet in a different direction, that is a choice, and some people boil it down to just that. They just want to have their stuff picked up. And luckily, as of late, and coming to consoles very soon, that choice, that one thing that a lot of people want is going to allow for more variety, because all Sentinels will have the ability to use vacuum. So good on all platforms. And so again, we return to what are our choices. Survival, objective. What's the objective you're going after? Are you going on a capture? Maybe you want to take the Kubrow that can knock down VIP targets, especially since a lot of those VIP targets have been made immune to a lot of stunning Warframe abilities. So just for a moment, returning to our earlier footage of Valkyr with Greg Prime, my Adarza Kavat, my tiny Adarza Kavat that I got from the glitch. Basically, I want to return to these 3 questions. Is my survivability in question? No, Valkyr has the ability to go invincible and life strike enemies, so that gives me the opportunity, if I so choose, to equip a Kavat or a Kubrow for more damage output or more utility. Now, again, I do think that the Kavats stand for more opportunity as utility, as they have things like Sense Danger, although I do think that mod needs, it got nerfed a bit recently, where, granted, the enemies were way too hot pink, but you could see them through walls. Now you can't see them through walls. I think it's a bit too underpowered now that you can't see them through walls, and it gave the Kavats, again, more utility, and I would like to see a bit more of that utility return to them, since it seems like it was over-nerfed. I've been meaning to check that mod on where it is in updates, but anyway, so with all this in mind, my objective was simply to do more damage with Valkyr, which made Adarza an easy choice. Now, I could also easily pick the Digging Kubrow. I believe it's Tsukina? Damn it, I just read their names. I'm not the biggest Kubrow user. And so, yeah, if I wanted to make sure I was restoring energy or piles of health at a given moment, easily could pick the Digging Kubrow to give me more resources like health, energy, or even ammo, or even survivability through life support in a survival mission. The Digging Kubrow also affords that. And so let's go ahead and take a look at all frames and pose these 3 questions for all frames. So let's conclude by doing some rapid fire answering of our own question. How are we surviving? What is our consistency? What is our objective? So when we look at Ash, our objective is obviously to put out a fuck ton of damage, and Ash has survivability through his Blade Storm, teleporting, and of course cloaking. He can really just stay alive through different techniques, flashing into invulnerability within Blade Storm, teleporting himself outside of a large number of enemies, or even simply cloaking. And that means that I think we can really improve upon his consistency, whether it's within weapons or within his own ability damage through things like the Smita, the Adarza Kavats, or even Carrier, adding more ammo to the weapons that you might bring along with him, or even the Digging Kubrow. I already forgot the name because it's late and I'm tired and the World Series just ended. Anyway, so yeah, I think he just would benefit from a lot more utility as opposed to trying to improve his survivability. Let's move forward to Atlas. Atlas is kind of a tank, but kind of not, where he has a lot of armor, but doesn't really have any additional abilities to help him stay alive. I love Atlas still, nonetheless. I think that quick thinking combined with prime flow is where you really find a lot of his survivability, and your objective is really to keep hitting with those fists a lot of the time, in my mind, to output massive amounts of damage even without crit. And you can also look at it from the perspective of keeping walls up, keeping your enemies petrified, or even keeping your Rumbler buddies going, and you want to protect that energy pool, or at least in my mind, I do. And so I want to stay consistent with a Sentinel with him. So next we have Banshee, but first we should pull her up. And Banshee, as you can see here, I don't play with her. I don't play with a number of frames. Some of the reason for that is because kind of these one-hit frames where it's just like, well, you just do this one ability, and that's really where a lot of the utility of that frame comes from. I personally think that Banshee could use a tweak, maybe a bit of a rework to potentially look a bit more like Mag or Volt. I loved their reworks where they have these abilities that are kind of set it and forget it, and very powerful abilities. So like when you look at Sound Quake, I think that could really benefit from being a set it and forget it type of ability, or having a lot more utility for it, having to make yourself stationary, unable to use weapons. But this isn't a rework show. Scott, come on, let's get to it. So Banshee, from what I know, having played with her and seen others played with her, could really benefit from survivability. So you're looking to cloak yourself, potentially combined with Naramon and capitalizing on those weak points, or just grabbing a Sentinel and making sure that you're staying alive as much as possible, protecting your energy pool to help keep yourself alive and keep outputting more weak points for damage. So let's go ahead and look at Chroma. I should just pull these up, but of course I have to pull up the window, and I keep looking away from the window to do so. So Chroma is a very survivable frame. I think that he stands to benefit from some utilities out of say the Smita or a couple of the Kubrows, but really he doesn't benefit from crit damage, so that does rule out the Adarza, but that doesn't mean that you can't focus on just using his Vex armor to output damage through your weapons. Use your Vex armor and potentially leave his effigy behind doing damage elsewhere while you do damage with your weapons, which means, yes, you could easily equip an Adarza or a Smita to, again, gain multiple benefits from the Smita, or just put out more damage through the Adarza. And so then we have Ember. Again, a frame that doesn't really benefit from critical damage. The Adarza won't do anything for her. And I think this is also a frame that is more fragile than really given benefit for, because she has to rely on Firequake to really make sure she's sustaining herself a lot of the time, keeping enemies knocked down to keep herself from being knocked down. I think that she can go both ways, where you pick a Sentinel or a Kavat or Kubrow to find utility to keep her Firequake going. So like you bring the Digging Kubrow, yes, I still have forgotten that name, You can bring the Digging Kubrow to keep restoring your energy pool, or you can, if you choose to have a quick thinking on her, you can, again, keep enemies away from accessing damage through that energy pool as much as possible. So then you have Equinox. Again, a bit of a one-hit frame. I almost never see the dark side of this frame, but a frame that doesn't really have too much survivability, except for the fact that the light side does so much damage and procs slash so often, it basically creates a pretty consistent stun, giving you the opportunity to walk around without being harmed. So there's kind of... This one's tough, because oftentimes the objective is just to do damage, but doesn't benefit from crit. So I would say restoring the energy pool or keeping enemies away from the energy pool would be the direction I would go. Equip a Sentinel, or again, our Digging Kubrow, to keep that energy pool fresh, because Equinox will chew through a lot of the energy pool. Yes, there are dark side builds, but come on, most of the time what we see are the light side builds. So let's go ahead and look at Excalibur. Excalibur is not like Wukong or Valkyr, in which even with his sword, he still is more susceptible to damage. I would typically lean towards a Sentinel on this, as a lot of his damage output can come from his sword. Of course, you can blind, which I think gives you the opportunity to go Smita or Darza in particular to add more damage to your blinded enemies, because you're surviving through control. So let's go ahead, and we've got Frost. Very survivable frame, easily go with more utility most of the time, in my opinion. Again, this all comes down to how each individual will answer these three questions. Survival, what is your objective? Don't really need to worry about survival being an objective, so survival is maintained through control effects and through the bubble, the Frost bubble. And so this gives you an opportunity to access more damage through your weapons, or add more utility to friends and yourself on the battlefield. Hydroid. Oh boy. So again, another frame that I feel just needs some TLC. And so I would say that Hydroid is not incredibly survivable if you feel like taking your Hydroid out. Most of the time, does not benefit from crit. Most of the time, I would say, definitely benefits from having a Sentinel, keeping enemies away from that energy pool, and simply adding more survivability through things like Guardian or Shield Charger. So, Inaros, this one is a bit surprising. I would almost always lean towards a Sentinel with Meta Ray, because Meta Ray restores 14% of health, and he has a massive health pool. Now, of course, that massive health pool can benefit Kubrows and Kavats through Link Health. However, I think that the objective with Inaros is to constantly be maintaining your health, making it larger so that you can access it through, that sounds weird, restoring it so that you can access his abilities more frequently, doing more damage and simply tanking more damage on the battlefield. Ivara is one of these frames who can benefit from overlap in stealth, in cloaking, so Shade or I believe it's Hurus Kubrow would basically benefit her in survivability. Or, again, a frame that can output a lot of damage, relies on an energy pool for that damage, keep enemies away from it with a Sentinel. And so we come to... No, we already did Excalibur. No! So we come to Limbo. I think Limbo is an easy choice when it comes to utility, has a lot of survivability in the Rift, and so you can add more critical damage to your weapons, allowing him to do more single target damage or damage to enemies around him in the Rift bubble. And then, of course, we have Loki. Add more stealth, which adds more survivability. I really don't He has such a massive energy pool that he really doesn't have to access most of the time, especially if you're a Xenuric user. You can cloak to protect that energy pool. I would simply go with more utility for your weapons, especially your weapons, so that you can really keep the damage on to those irradiated, confused enemies or disarmed enemies. So then we have another Loki. No, we don't. We have Mag. Mag is tough because she actually has, after a rework that gives her a lot of synergy between her abilities, she has a lot of energy usage for a small energy pool. So in my mind, I would go with the Sentinel, even though I don't access her energy pool with quick thinking too often. I think that it's still important to keep her health constantly regenerating with a meta ray or shields on through Guardian or Shield Charger, and continue using Polarize to buff that overshield. So with Mesa, we have the opportunity again to add crit damage to her pistols, her peacemakers, and with Shattered Shield deflecting 95% of damage, and Poop. What's the name of the other ability? Oh well, I'll correct myself in annotations. If you turned off annotations, find out what I missed here by turning them on. Anyway, so yeah, she just benefits from a lot more utility. Again, get a Digger Dog and easily dig up some energy to restore that energy she eats through with her peacemakers and keep fighting. So Mirage is another frame that has to rely on her energy pool to output tons of damage, but doesn't have a lot of survivability anywhere. So you likely want to equip it quick thinking, and at the same time don't want enemies hitting that energy pool as much as possible. So Sentinel, to me, seems like the full way to go. Next is plain Necros. Believe it or not, yes, I have two Necros Primes, much like I've had many duplicates here. I was forming regular Necros before Necros Prime came out, and for some reason I just really wanted to forma him. So I had my fill of forming, and eventually I'll get to those Necros Primes, at least one of them. But Necros is a super survivable frame. In fact, that's a lot of his builds really revolve around that survivability when they're not revolving around farming for resources or mods. So definitely up the utility, whether it's for the team, for damage, or just for getting more resources through Asmita. I think that is the best way to go for him, in my opinion. Again, we all got to make these decisions for ourselves. Nezha, very survivable through Warding Halo, but if you want to add that Warding Halo to the rest of the team, if you're on a 4-man team, you might want to look into having things to restore your energy, like Egg Digging Kubrow. This is very helpful to, again, maintaining that team health, and I don't know the name of the augment. I have to look it up, and again, it will be in the annotations. But yes, definitely a powerful augment. We used it on a raid recently. Very powerful, very worthwhile. Nova is, again, a frame that doesn't have a lot of survivability, can use control and weakening to protect yourself, but at the same time can still take hits, doesn't have armor to protect her health. So really another frame that has a large energy pool that you want to rely on to prevent yourself from dying, but at the same time you don't want enemies hitting it that much, so use a Sentinel for protecting that energy pool, keeping your health regenerating, keeping those shields up. Nyx can go many different ways because of her augments and her ability complexity through simplicity, where each ability doesn't really require duration and range and strength. Instead, it's just like this one ability only uses duration and range. This ability only uses strength and range. And so this really allows her a lot of different utilities, and I think adding more utility to her most of the time will be the way to go, whether that's through damage or other types of buffs that Kubrows and Kavats can provide. So Oberon is another frame, much like many I side with the thought that he could use some TLC. Basically, he just is a jack of all trades, but all of those trades are kind of need some love. He could use, again, a look like Mag or Volt got, where they just got more powerful, and I would love to see Oberon get more powerful. And for me, when I see an Oberon player, I do think that the greatest benefit they provide is a lot more survivability, and adding more utility to that survivability, I think, would benefit myself as an Oberon player the most. So let's go ahead and take a look at Saren. Saren is one of my favorite frames, and she definitely needs her energy pool as much as possible to keep outputting those viral procs and doing damage to enemies as she builds bombs. But I think that once you have a max prime flow and utilize quick thinking for survivability, the best way to go is Sentinel, again, to keep enemies from tagging her through that energy pool, trying to take her down. Titania is one of these complex frames that I feel is balanced along a knife's edge as far as her builds can go, and I think that a Sentinel protecting this kind of these balanced builds really benefits her, to make sure that when the enemies start taking her into her energy pool for damage, then you can simply go into fairy mode to utilize Life Strike to get your health back. Basically, again, protecting yourself as much as possible, restoring your health, restoring your shields. So next we've got Trin. Trin is basically a tank these days, and a tank for the entire team. She can make the entire team a tank. So while she's adding utility to the team, might as well double down on that objective. Add more utility where you can through Blessing and through different Kubrows and Kavats. So, and of course you can also add utility to yourself through Carrier's Precept. Definitely worth remembering. And I also want to note that Jhin also kind of has this utility that can doesn't have to benefit just the player, doesn't have to just protect them. In fact, Jhin kind of creates an opportunity for players around them to just take down more enemies without being bothered by them attacking you. So Jhin also has this idea of utility behind its precept. Valkyr, again, super survivable, near invincible frame. Definitely always go for the utility, whether that's through more ammo, although I wouldn't go with more ammo or really bolstering your weapons, because a lot of times you're likely going to be utilizing Hysteria. So I would go with an Adarza still, nonetheless, because you can get into that red crit damage with her Hysteria. You utilize Jhin, or even an Adarza if you're looking to gain some extra rare resources. So then we have Vauban. Vauban is, of course, a super control-y frame. He does have some cool damage builds, but nonetheless, I would go for survivability, utilizing what is not really a huge energy pool, still a good size, but not huge. And so basically you want to be able to protect that thing that can keep you alive outside of your control and keep bolstering your health and shields. Volt is a frame I find to be super survivable because he, again, if I wanted Oberon to be modeled after a particular frame or their rework, I think it definitely would be Volt, because Volt basically with one augment becomes a jack of all trades, where you're doing control, you're doing massive damage, and you're doing support for the team where you're adding overshields to them. And so I think that sounds great for Oberon. Definitely want to keep his support power, as opposed to where I thought Mag would potentially become more of a support frame with her rework. I was surprised she actually became a lot more of a damaging frame. This isn't a rework show, Anyways, so Volt is, in my mind, very survivable, capable of constantly bolstering his overshield, so I would definitely add more utility. He does not gain the benefit of critical, so I don't think the Adarza is a good choice here. You can add energy, go with Jin, go with adding more ammo, because again, these abilities that are kind of set them and forget them. You can add an Adarza to add critical to your weapons, add more ammo for your weapons, a lot of options in this frame, or just go with more protection if you want through a Sentinel. Wukong is a bit closer to Excalibur than he is to Valkyr, where he has the opportunity to be invincible, but not entirely, and I think that adding a bit more survivability really benefits him a lot, where you're mitigating costs to your energy pool, which you can rely on a lot for damage. Zephyr is another frame that I just don't play a lot of, where basically we look at her and say that 2 of her moves can use a tweak or a rework because of Parkour 2.0, and I would really like to see that. Nonetheless, Turbulence and Tornado offers a lot of potential for damage and damage mitigation, which means I think that adding utility to Zephyr is really the way to go, because you can mitigate a lot of area damage. I believe it's 15 meters of area damage, and that can also benefit a Kubrow or a Kavat, or even particular Sentinels. I would add ammo, or even add more damage to your weapons if I were a Zephyr player in the state she is today. This isn't a rework show, Scott! So as we can see here, there are really a lot more options than one might think when it comes to companions, and a lot of decision making when it comes to what you want to do in your game. What is your objective? Are you playing with a particular weapon? Do you want to add 2 times critical damage to the Adamus? Do you just want to focus on red crit damage through Mesa or Valkyr or Excalibur? Do you want more consistency within your play, picking up more objects, adding more ammo to your weapons, or picking up more energy on the battlefield? Do you need more survival out of your companion or Sentinel? And these options do exist, and I think there are more options than we often think at first glance. I hope that maybe this video really broadened some of what you might think of different Sentinels and Kubrows or Kavats, and we will be back in 2 weeks with the 3rd episode of State of the Frame. I do want to note before I go that I have a feeling that since it was a late night recording this episode before the day it posts, I think that the 88th Armory, for those who are interested in watching that, will likely post a day late, likely on Saturday, but I will still aim to try and have it out on Friday. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and if you liked what we had to offer here, do the thing.